Services for child protection are often a young person's only hope, their sole way of escape from a life of abuse, but sometimes these services greatly fail those under their care. The case of Terrell Peterson is one such example, and it may well be the worst and most appalling case of child abuse in Georgia state history. The details of the following story are extremely disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Terrell Peterson lived a short life overshadowed by abuse and neglect, but even from the day of his birth on March 1st, 1992, this young boy was fighting against the odds for anything resembling a normal, happy childhood. Terrell was born to a mother suffering from drug addiction. This resulted in Terrell being born with cocaine already in his system, and tragically, his mother's dependency on narcotics would ultimately lead to Terrell's life being destroyed soon after. Before Terrell Peterson was even born, though, his mother was using her food stamps and welfare checks to obtain drugs. This troubling behavior did not change with Terrell's birth, and it unsurprisingly resulted in the severe neglect of Terrell and his siblings. The following year, the Fulton County Department of Family and Children Services received a phone call reporting that Terrell's parents were locking him and the other children inside the home on weekends and leaving them to fend for themselves. This lack of care was already concerning, but it gets far worse when you realize that the parents were doing so without providing the children with food or water in the home. In 1995, the Fulton County DFCS received another complaint, this time alerting them to the fact that the children were being left unsupervised. This report was followed with another. This report detailed how the children, including Terrell, had been begging the neighbors for food. In November of 1995, a call made to the DFCS shared that the mother was using while the children were being left with their maternal grandmother. This may seem like a reasonable choice from a mother aware of her own shortcomings as a caregiver, but Terrell's grandmother was extremely sick and physically incapable of looking after Terrell or his siblings. These complaints were handled by over 10 different caseworkers, but despite the obvious neglect and mistreatment, nothing was done until the following year. In 1996, Terrell was finally taken away from his mother. This should have been the beginning of a better life for Terrell. Instead, it was the beginning of an incredibly brutal end. DFCS protocol states that when an individual is taken into custody, they should be placed with a blood relative and should be visited by a caseworker once a month. Terrell was taken from his mother and placed with the grandmother of his half-siblings Tommy and Tasha. Terrell was now under the care of Farina Peterson, a woman he was not directly related to. It is in this care that Terrell would be subject to unthinkably cruel and inhumane abuse. Terrell would survive less than 2 years in Farina's home, and after arriving in the home in June, he was already making his first visit to the emergency room by November. It was Thanksgiving, 1996. Terrell was rushed to the hospital after a severe beating and was diagnosed with battered child syndrome, a term used to collectively describe injuries in children associated with abuse and neglect. Farina Peterson was arrested and indicted on misdemeanor charges as a result, though when it came time for Terrell to testify in court, his caseworker, Cheryl Elmore, who also happened to be Terrell's only means of making it to the courtroom, refused to show up to court. With no victim to testify, Judge Catherine E. Malicki dismissed the case. Farina went home free to continue abusing Terrell Peterson. Social worker Cheryl Elmore had greatly failed little Terrell, but to make matters far worse, she concocted a fraudulent memo alleging that the trial had in fact taken place. She wrote, "The judge believed Miss Peterson and did not feel she was guilty of child abuse." These blatant lies were never questioned by Elmore's supervisors, and Terrell's awful home environment was deemed safe, despite the truth being the exact opposite. The young boy was in grave danger, but it's not as though nobody was taking notice. Prior to the incident, Terrell was enrolled in Head Start, an education program that provides for low-income families. Terrell's teacher reported that before Thanksgiving, she caught the then 4-year-old digging in the trash looking for food. After the beating that left Terrell hospitalized, and after the court case, the same teacher noticed Terrell displaying signs of significant injury to his legs and feet. When she removed Terrell's sneakers and inspected the young boy's feet, she made a horrifying discovery. A year after these incidents, Terrell Peterson suffered cardiac arrest. He was taken to hospital. Doctors fought to save the boy's life, but ultimately they failed to restart Terrell's heart. He died 45 minutes after arriving at the hospital. The responding physician declared Terrell's symptoms the worst symptoms of child abuse they had ever personally witnessed. Terrell was just 5 years old. His body was covered in cuts, bruises, and cigarette burns. He weighed just 29 pounds. A coroner determined Terrell's cause of death as blunt impact injuries to the head, trunk, and extremities. Farina Peterson, the woman trusted to care for Terrell, was charged with capital murder. While the details of Terrell's abuse were already both heartbreaking and horrifying, more details were soon to come to light, and they would prove that the previously known incidents only scratched the surface when it came to the appalling abuse inflicted upon Terrell. Tasha Peterson, Terrell's half-sister, was just 11 years old when Terrell died. She had witnessed the unrelenting abuse inflicted upon her half-brother, but her grandmother, Farina, was not the only villain in Terrell's story. After Terrell's tragic demise, Tasha revealed the true extent of the horrific abuse, and she revealed that her aunt, Terry Lynn Peterson, was equally responsible for Terrell's death. Terry Lynn Peterson lived with her mother, Farina, her nephews Tommy and Terrell, and her niece, Tasha. Terry Lynn was responsible for the children's care alongside Farina, yet some of the most despicable acts of abuse toward Terrell came from Terry Lynn. After Terrell's death, the injuries on the young boy's body were examined. The abrasions, cuts, and bruises were littered from the back of Terrell's head down to the soles of his feet. Investigators determined the wounds to be the result of assaults using a dog collar, a telephone cord, and multiple belts. Based on the wounds on Terrell's body, these specific assaults had been regularly taking place for up to a year prior to the 5-year-old's death. Terrell had scars on his face and scars inside his mouth and on his lips. These implied that somebody had been force-feeding Terrell. The young boy was subjected to unthinkable cruelty at the hands of his own family members. There exists no suitable explanation as to why, but Tasha revealed that Terry Lynn believed she was not blood related to Terrell and that he had been fathered by somebody other than her brother. Terrell's daily life in the Peterson home involved him being tied up to the banister of the stairs with pantyhose and being left so long he would sometimes have to sleep standing up. This revelation from Tasha was supported by the lacerations found on Terrell's wrists and Terrell's DNA found on pantyhose in the Peterson home. Investigators also found a handwritten note containing rules for Terrell's care. The note was allegedly written by Farina Peterson and read as follows: "He gets a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, lunch he gets grits, and dinner he gets grits. His hands are always tied." When Terrell was allowed free from the banister, he was permitted to sleep on a pallet in the hallway. According to Tasha, though, Terrell's hands were almost always kept tied. Tasha testified that Terry Lynn had repeatedly and brutally beaten Terrell with a whip. She also witnessed her aunt beating Terrell with her bare hands and violently feeding Terrell using a large spoon. Tasha claimed that not all the abuse was physical, as Terry Lynn was verbally abusive as well and regularly referred to Terrell, not by name, but instead as the rat. In an even more disturbing confession, Tasha admitted to beating Terrell at her aunt's command. Terry Lynn Peterson ordered both Tasha and her young brother Tommy to attack their malnourished sibling. During these assaults, it's likely Terrell had his hands tied together, leaving him completely defenseless. Another report alleged that Terry Lynn Peterson approached Terrell's teachers at the Head Start school and requested that they feed him less. Terry Lynn reportedly did this in an attempt to stop Terrell from defecating on the floor. This was not because Terrell lacked toilet training or had a medical issue. It was because, as previously stated, he was often tied up for all hours of the day. The same Head Start teacher told heartbreaking tales of Terrell's ravenous hunger, how he would steal food from the teachers and students, and was seen searching through the trash for something to eat. The mystery behind Terrell's severe leg and feet injuries were also made clearer with new evidence, as Tasha shared that Terrell had been made to stand on a heated grate as punishment for Farina's arrest. Despite being raised in a household of horror, Tasha's life was starkly different from Terrell's. She did not receive the same treatment or abuse, and she was fed regularly. This idea is perhaps clearest thanks to Tasha's recollection of one of Terrell's birthdays. Terrell's aunt bought a birthday cake for the occasion, though shockingly, Terry Lynn refused to allow Terrell to eat any of it. "We all ate some, all of us except for Terrell. She did not want him to have any." Terrell's diet consisted of only barley, oatmeal, and water. For Tasha, there were at least traces glimpses of a normal, healthy upbringing. Despite witnessing such cruelty, she, along with her grandmother, aunt, and brother, would eat meat and vegetables as Terrell lived on minimal nutrition. Tommy Peterson, Tasha's brother and Terrell's half-brother, was just 6 years old when Terrell died. During Terry Lynn Peterson's trial, Georgia state prosecutors shared a statement regarding Tommy Peterson and his involvement in the proceedings. "I don't expect you will hear from Tommy Peterson in this trial. If you do hear anything about him, I think the evidence will be that he is too traumatized to be able to testify to you because of his condition from this and from seeing what he saw." Terry Lynn Peterson took the opportunity during her trial to claim that because of the abuse she had personally suffered during her own childhood at the hands of Farina, she did not have a proper moral reference regarding Terrell's treatment. She claimed this is why she did not call the police or child services at any point during Terrell's clear physical deterioration. Both Terry Lynn Peterson and her mother Farina were found to have played an equal part in Terrell's death. They were both found guilty of murder and sentenced to life behind bars. In the aftermath of this harrowing case, many pointed fingers at the Fulton County Department of Family and Children's Services. Despite multiple reports and multiple visits to hospital emergency rooms, nothing was done to protect or save Terrell Peterson from the torturous abuse and neglect he was forced to endure for the majority of his life. After Terrell's death, a social worker made the maddening decision to declare both Tasha and Tommy safe in the home with Farina. These children were also failed, though luckily this decision was reversed after further investigation, and Farina Peterson is now in prison, with no chance of abusing any more of her grandchildren. Tasha and Tommy were sent to live with another family. Terrell Peterson was buried in rural Georgia. The young boy's headstone was paid for out of pocket by Terrell's lawyers. Georgia DCFS conducted 2 investigations into Terrell's case, and while they found evidence such as a failure to make sufficient contact with Terrell and a serious lack of judgment, these findings were not revealed to the public. The department covered up this tragedy and seemingly many more. Terrell Peterson was one of 800 children who died between 1995 and 1998 after having their cases brought to the DCFS, or DHS, the Department of Human Services. After the investigation into Terrell's death, Atlanta Area Administrator Ralph Mitchell made a statement claiming that the department had followed all its protocols when dealing with Terrell's case. He declared that members of the organization were outraged at the loss of precious life, that there had been numerous violations throughout the history of the case, but that they had responded immediately and comprehensively to the reports of abuse. A private memo that Mitchell later sent to a superior revealed Ralph Mitchell admitting his entire statement to be untrue. Mitchell fed the public lies to hide the truth about Terrell's death, and he got away with it. Neither Mitchell nor Cheryl Elmore, the caseworker who lied during the original court case involving Terrell and Farina Peterson, were fired. Judge Catherine E. Malicki, who dismissed that first court case, continued in her career as a judge until her retirement in 2010. Ralph Mitchell went on to retire with a state pension, and he only did so once the true details about the corruption within his organization came to light. In 1999, CBS aired an investigation into Terrell Peterson's case. This prompted the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to raid the Department of Family and Children's Services and investigate the deaths and murders of multiple children. Georgia Governor Roy Barnes then signed the Terrell Peterson Act. This allows doctors to temporarily take custody of battered children. It may be the only good thing to have come from Terrell's tragic death, and it will hopefully help to stop such instances of abuse from ever happening again in the state of Georgia. Atlanta-based lawyer Don Keenan was anonymously sent the files detailing Terrell's case, and after examining them, he decided to sue the state on Terrell's behalf. Thank God he was dead. I think anybody would have known or understood what this little guy was going through would rejoice in his death. Don Keenan. Keenan's efforts with cases like Terrell's have led to many state law changes that intend to better protect and care for children in foster care. Terrell Peterson deserved much better from the Child Protection Services, and while most people in Terrell's short life did little to protect him at all, there are those who have fought to ensure that no other children suffer the same horrendous fate as this innocent boy did in 1998. Some children experience nothing but pain and sorrow. Terrell Peterson and many others have been made to suffer in silence. There are many people to blame in Terrell's heartbreaking case, but no detail is quite as shocking as the fact that a 5-year-old boy was abused, beaten, and starved to death by members of his own family.